Hello everybody, Jim Jock with Remax North Country. Thanks for joining in today, either on YouTube or a podcast, Jock of All Trades podcast. Either one, hope you'll like and subscribe, share the post, and hope you enjoy what I have to say today. Today I wanted to talk about two terms that are often confused in the home buying process. Two parts of the process. And the two parts of the process deal one with a home inspection and one with an appraisal. So we're going to talk about what the two are and when they happen in a timeline, what's the difference, so that we have a better understanding whether you're a buyer or a seller. It can be important to understand the difference and how they impact a transaction from either perspective. So information is knowledge. So here we go, information for you. In New York State, both home inspectors and appraisals are regulated by the state of New York. Big surprise, right? Everything is licensed and kept track of, and to be either a home inspector or an appraiser or even a real estate broker or a real estate salesperson, you are required to, meet minimum standards to get your license, and then ongoing minimum amount of training to keep your license. So the same is applies to home inspectors and to appraisers. So something to know: the number one, the difference is a home inspector, his customer is the buyer. So a home inspector looks at a house or a property for the purposes of providing a report to the buyer, or if a home is being sold, pre-inspected for the seller of the property. And we're going to go over what's covered in the report that they give, all the different areas. And the areas are, again, part of the standards of practice set by New York State on what is that supposed to look like. So a home inspection, when you're buying a property, we'll use that as an example. A home inspection is something that the buyer pays for, at least in our market. The buyer pays for after you're under contract. So you've negotiated, you've got an all-signed contract, you're now going to buy the house, okay? So in the contract there are protections for a buyer, that certain things have to happen in order for them to be able to withdraw from a transaction. One of those is a home inspection, or actually it's an inspections contingency. Buyers can do a home inspection. They can do a pest inspection if they want. They can test for radon gases. They can do a whole bunch of things. Again, the buyer, at the buyer's expense. So the home inspection is an inspection of the property and systems of the house to give a buyer an idea: is there something with the house that we didn't see when we walk through it? Like maybe a faulty electrical panel, or the roof is in really bad shape that we couldn't see from the ground, but when the home inspector goes up on the roof, as another example. So the home inspections client is the buyer. We'll just use that. So the other thing that comes up is, what about the report that we get and all the things that they may list? And the job of a home inspector is to identify things that they see that don't meet certain standards. So if you have a driveway that has a lot of cracks and things like that, they may say that there are defects in the driveway and you should have it evaluated by a licensed professional, to get an idea what needs to be done, if anything. So that's usually what they're going to say. They're not going to say, well, you need to repair it and this is going to do this, whatever. But the home inspection report says, here's what I see, and here's what you could do if you want to look into it further. If it's something electrical related, they're going to say recommend being evaluated by a contractor, a licensed electrician, or something like that. to further identify, what should be done. So they're gonna state the observations, and then, they'll usually give you an idea. If you want to take that one step farther, here's what you should do. The reports usually include pictures, things like that. So because it's a snapshot, it's really designed to identify the big things that you don't see when you walk through the property. But it'll also identify things that you do see, like for example, if the windows don't close, or it's leaking air, so you're seeing a lot of moisture build up on the inside of the windows, they're going to report on those as well, because they are observations that they saw at the time. So the repairs that are identified, though, are not required to be fixed. It's just giving you an idea. Here's what's going on the property. Just that. The repairs that are identified are not required to be fixed based on the home inspection. So based on the home inspection, though, you as a buyer can then use that as a negotiation tool to do a lot of things, to walk away from the transaction. It's like, oh my gosh, there's so much stuff broke here. I gotta, what was I thinking? So you can withdraw from the transaction. You can say, I'm fine with things that came up. It's consistent with what I thought was there, or whatever. Or you can negotiate repairs, or you can, instead ask for an adjustment of the purchase price to be able to move forward. So in short, the home inspection is a point of negotiation. Okay, it's, again, the client is the buyer. The repairs are not required. So the other part of it is farther down the process in the transaction. If you're purchasing a home and you're getting a bank loan, the lender needs to make sure that, say you're going to buy a house for $150,000. They need to know that, it's not falling apart and there won't be a house there, next year because it's falling apart, or that it's not worth $150,000. So the way that your lender validates the bank loan, you want $150,000. That's great. Show me that what you're buying is worth $150,000. Show me that is done by a bank appraiser. So the lender will require an appraisal of the property to determine the value of your loan is supported by the value of the property, and that the condition of the home supports, that it's not falling apart, that it's going to be there long enough for you to live there, and for the value to be recovered by the bank from you in the form of monthly payments, right? So even though you as a buyer are paying for the appraisal report, client is the lender or the bank or whoever you're getting your mortgage from. So they're going to, like I said, they're going to check for value and condition, but the report goes to the bank. You as a borrower are going to get a copy of the report, and you're going to pay for the appraisal, right? Because that's how things work. But that appraisal is for the bank to make sure that you're, if you want to borrow $150,000, that there's $150,000 or more of a house there that's in reasonable condition and it's not falling apart, and there aren't things like peeling paint, and we'll get into that a little bit. But so very different. Home inspection is a buyer report. Appraisal is a lender report. Sometimes the appraisal report will say, we support the value as long as these repairs are made. Okay. In a case like that, like say it's peeling paint on a shed or something like that. So we'll support the value as long as the shed is painted. In that case, if you don't paint the shed, then they're not going to give you the loan. Or if you don't repair a roof, then they're not going to give you the loan. So repairs that are identified in the appraisal report must be done in order for them to give you the money to purchase the home. So in that case, the appraisal, if they identify repairs, those need to be done. Those are pretty much mandatory. Okay, so if the seller isn't going to do them, then the buyer doesn't get the loan. Okay, and not just that buyer, but probably any buyer that would require an appraisal. So that's an important differentiation. Is the home inspection, the repairs are not required. They can be negotiated, or parts can be negotiated. But when you get to the appraisal report, things that are identified as repairs in the appraisal report must be completed. So important differentiation. So let's go back to the report itself. What does a home inspector or a home inspection look at? I made a list of the categories because there are so many that I didn't want to leave any of them out. So the standards of practice on New York State Department of State's website that lists, I guess, what the part of the law that governs home inspections has a standards of practice. Home inspectors will look at these 11 or 12 different areas, and then it even lists what type of things that they will report on, what type of things they will not report on. Like, they're not going to run and check the pool and make sure that the pool is circulating water within the manufacturer desired intent. No, the home inspector doesn't look at recreational equipment and things like that, things that are outside the property. A home inspector is essentially looking at the house and some outbuildings like garages, but not really much outside of that. They will look at, the first thing they'll look at is site conditions. They'll make sure that the property outside is graded sufficient that water that comes off the roof, or snow if you're in the North Country, that it's graded properly, that there isn't evidence of standing water, there isn't a reverse pitch so that the ground is higher than the house. So they will do some information about the site conditions. And then they'll talk about structural systems. They'll look at the house itself. They'll look at the exterior to make sure that it's sided, the siding isn't damaged or broken, or they'll report on the windows and do the windows close? Have they lost the seal between panes of glass in a thermal pane? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that they'll do there. So they'll look at the structural. They're looking for evidence of damage, or that something, well, maybe not damage, maybe it wasn't built right. Maybe maybe there's a garage, but the roof has got a big dip in the middle or something like that. They'll look at some of the structural like that. They'll look at the roof. They'll look at the condition of either the asphalt, or if it's metal, the condition of the metal. Is it flashed away from chimneys properly? So it'll look at the roof systems, the gutter systems, things like that. Then they'll look at some of the inside things with the house. They're going to look at the plumbing systems. So they're going to make sure that where there's a faucet, the water runs, that where there's a drain, the water drains. They're not going to evaluate necessarily the septic system, which is where does the water go when it leaves the house. But they will look at the plumbing systems. They'll usually run the hot water to see that the hot water is running and working properly, and that's the right temperature. And usually along the way, they'll run the water and be able to tell if there are leaks under the sink, and if there are, they'll report on that. So they'll look at the plumbing systems. They'll also look at the electrical systems. They'll check and make sure that all of the lights work. And that's why when I list properties, I always tell sellers, make sure you've got all your light bulbs are tested, so that we can make sure that it's not a burnt bulb versus an electrical issue. So we want to rule those out on the selling side ahead of time, so that when a home inspector comes in, then they're not saying that none of the lights in the kitchen work. Okay, maybe they're burnt bulbs. Well, We don't know that. So they're going to report that it's a potential electrical issue because they're not working. It's not their job to, test the bulbs to see if they're working, or if there are no bulbs in a given socket, it's not their responsibility to find one, put it in so that they can report on it. They're going to say unable to test or something like that. They're also going to look and identify if there are ground fault circuit interrupt breakers near your sinks and water and things like that, like in your laundry area, in your bathrooms, in your kitchen, in your utility rooms, wherever there's running water and electric nearby, should be a ground fault circuit interrupt or a GFCI breaker. So they'll report on whether there is or there isn't. And if there's not, they'll say it's recommended that within X number of feet, like that. They'll also look, some of the older homes that used to have a 2-prong plug, which are, pretty common to see. A lot of times what homeowners have done, that it's not recommended, but they put a 3-prong plug where a 2-prong was, so that they can plug something in. But you're really not supposed to do that. So when they put their tester in, it'll say ungrounded plug, so there's no ground. That's what that 3rd prong is. So it's the prong that goes nowhere because it's ungrounded. So they're going to report on those type of things. They're going to look at the panel box and take the cover off the panel box so that they can see what's on the inside. And then they're going to give a report on what they're seeing. Remember, the home inspection is, here's what I see, and then they'll state that in the report. And if there's an issue, they'll recommend. And again, some inspectors will, a lot of them use a software program, and they'll say it's either satisfactory or unsatisfactory, or they'll say that it's defective, or it's marginal, or not working, or it's a safety issue, or things like that. So they're going to report on the electrical. Next thing they're going to look at the heating systems. If there's heat there, they need to be able to test it. It's got to be working. So if you have, say, baseboard electric, they're going to turn on all the baseboard electric and test them all in every room to make sure that they're all working. And when they don't, or if there's one that doesn't, then there'll be a note in the report for that room that the heating wasn't working. Or if there's no heat in a room, they'll identify that. If you have a hot air furnace, then they'll turn up the thermostat and call for heat and report that it's working or not working. If you have they're not going to put wood in your wood stove. They're not going to do something like that. But they are going to test the heating system to make sure that it's working the way it's intended to. In our market here, where we're way up by the Canadian border, if the heat doesn't work, then that could be an issue, even more so for an appraisal, because how can you preserve the value of a home when you can't heat it? How can you do that? So heating system is something. At the same time, if there's an central air conditioning, then they will, if they can, they will test that. But in the wintertime, they usually won't, because they can cause damage to the system by trying to fire up the compressors when it's stupid cold outside. So, but they will report on air conditioning systems if the time of the year and the weather and the temperature and things like that allow. But if not, then they're going to probably say unable to test due to it being stupid cold out, and we don't want to ruin your equipment. They're also going to report on the interior of the home. They're going to say that there's a hole in the wall in the living room, or whatever it is, whatever the conditions of the wall, they're going to say that it's sheetrock, or it's plaster and lath or whatever. But they're going to report on the interior. They're going to look at the floorings. They're going to identify the type of flooring, or if there's missing flooring. So they're gonna look to, all the things of the interior. Insulation and ventilation is another thing they're going to look at. They'll usually go up into the attic part above the house and report on the type and amount of insulation and say it's either sufficient or recommended that you add more. They'll also, from in the attic, they will say if it's sufficiently vented or not. And if you have an insufficiently vented attic, that usually means that there's heat that doesn't escape in the winter and cold that could penetrate the house. Could also mean that there's moisture that doesn't escape, and then that can lead to other things. So they will report on the insulation and the ventilation. They will report on fireplaces. So they will look at the fireplace. They'll usually poke a camera up the flue when it's open and closed. They usually throw in certain things by default, and a lot of times with fireplaces they will say recommend that the chimney be evaluated by a licensed person, because that's not really a specialty they do. They're just reporting on the basic status of a fireplace or a wood stove or whatever. So they're going to look at that, and they're going to look at the attic, whether it's finished or unfinished. They're going to look at the attic and make a report on if it's insulated or not insulated, or what is it up there. So they're going to do that. They're also going to go into the basement and kind of do the same approach. If it's a finished basement, they're going to inspect it like it's another room, which it is. If it's unfinished, then they're going to say that. So all of that is what you'll see on a home inspection report. Pictures are great. A lot of the local home inspectors do a great job with plenty of photos and good descriptions. I think the average price in our market is usually $350. Some are $400, $425, depending on what other services they're providing. But it seems most common that the home inspections are $350 in our market, at least today. So the appraisal report is a lot more detailed report. It looks a lot more analytical. It looks like what it is. It's a government form that's filled out about here's all the details of the subject house that's being purchased and reported on, and then they'll show comparable properties on square footage. So it'll be a side-by-side comparison of square footage and bedrooms and bathrooms and types of heat and how many stall garages and what did it sell for per square foot. That's almost a mouthful. So the appraisal report is similar to a comparative marketing analysis that real estate professionals like myself do for the purposes of selling a home and pricing a home. So the appraisers have access to the same multiple listing system platform that we use for everyday business and pricing homes to sell. They look at what were the market conditions, and they use the information in the multiple listing system to help them determine the value as part of their appraisal. But their appraisal is pictures, it's comparable properties, and very long, detailed analytical report. So to substantiate the value for the lender. So lender is not going to lend you $150,000 or however much if the value isn't there. So they substantiate that with the appraisal report. So there you are, home inspection for the purposes of a buyer. Repairs are not required. Very detailed, top to bottom of the house. Appraisal is a product for the lender. The repairs must be done if you want the buyer to get their loan. Looking for value and condition, the value of the property and the condition to support the amount of the loan. I hope this was informational for you. I hope it helps you at least be a more informed consumer. So if you'd like any more information about this or other real estate topics, feel free to reach out to me. 518-593-2738. Jim Jock, Remax North Country. Thanks for listening.